Right, I'm now recording. Thank you for reminding me. I appreciate that. Themes in Sefer Bereshis we're looking at from the point of view of that Sefer Bereshis really describes the foundation of the whole Torah. And certainly the first two chapters of Bereshis teach us things not only about the foundations of the Torah and the Jewish people, but the foundations of mankind. And the entire story of Adam and Chava and Cain and Hevel is a description of human nature and the aspects of human nature. And the Torah is trying to give us an insight into the essence of human beings and human society and human values. So with that in mind, we're going to go back now and revisit Bereshis. We had two breaks here. One break, I gave a shir on Yerushalayim Habenuya Ki'ir Shechubra Lo Yachtov for Yom Yerushalayim. And then for Shavuos, we had a shir about Megillas Rus. So we've taken two little breaks from Sefer Bereshis, but now we are returning to it. Can you hear me? Everything okay on the Zoom? Yes, thumbs up? Very good. Okay, I'm going to get rid of... Okay, I'm still trying to let people in, but okay. So what I'd like to do today is have a look at a theme that we just started touching on in the last shir on Bereshis, which was the way the Torah describes the creation of Adam and Chava, and the remarkable fact of the Torah really describing the creation of Adam and Chava twice. Once in chapter 1 and once in chapter 2. I'm going to mute everybody because there's a bit of background noise.
Why don't they ask you about your Zoom?
Right, we've now got rid of background noise, but if anybody wants to contribute to the shir, you're always welcome to unmute yourself. In case you didn't know, in order to unmute yourself and make a comment, all you need to do is hold down the space bar on your computer while you're talking. If you hold down the space bar, while you're holding it down, you are able to speak. And when you let it go, again, you're once again muted. So this is a trick worth knowing. You don't actually need to press the mute or unmute. You can just hold down the space bar on your computer, and that's a way to do it. Okay, having said that, the Torah gives us the description of the creation of Adam and Eve twice, once in chapter 1 and once in chapter 2. And I mentioned to you just at the end of the last shir that we had on this subject that we're going to be looking at one of the most famous essays written by the late Rabbi Kimche Soloveitchik. Some of you might have read it. If you haven't, you should try and get an opportunity to read it. It's called The Lonely Man of Faith. The Lonely Man of Faith was written in the 1960s, and really the entire essay is about a very profound insight into the way in which the Torah describes Adam and Eve twice, once in chapter 1 and once in chapter 2. What I'd like to do with you is have a look at briefly at these two accounts of Adam and Chava. And I'm going to ask you to make some suggestions to me, spot the difference in the description. What are the differences? This is a very fascinating way of looking at Bereshis. What are the differences between the way it is described in chapter 1 as opposed to the way it is described in chapter 2? And once we've understood the differences, we can try and understand what the Torah is telling us by giving us this dual analysis of the creation of mankind. So without further ado, let's have a look, see if we can share a screen here. Right, can you see a screen? Yes, good, lovely, lovely. Okay. Okay, the dual account of the creation of Adam and Eve. That's what we're going to be looking at today. And you'll see that it's a very fascinating subject. Now, we've already looked at, just to remind you, this phrase, Vayoma and Elokim, Nase Odom B'Tzalmeinu Kidmuseinu, the Naaseh we've already looked at. We looked at Rashi, we looked at the Ramban. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu uses the plural. Let us make man B'Tzalmeinu Kidmuseinu, and the various different interpretations about what let us, who is the us. So the Ramban says that the us is HaKadosh Baruch Hu plus nature. Now, the HaKadosh Baruch Hu had already created the physical, natural world, and he says, together we're going to create a human being who is going to be the only being in the whole cosmos, which is combined of, which is like a hybrid creation of body and soul, of guf and neshama coming together. We'll see more about that as we go along. And what is he described as doing? Now, this is important. V'yirudu b'dgas hayom v'ofasham. What does v'yirudu mean? Right? V'yirudu means to, he translated here, is to rule. To rule means to have power over. So in the very, very beginning, the human being is created, and he's given a role in the world as being able to dominate nature. Now, none of the other animals are given this bracha to dominate the other animals. Of course, some animals attack other animals, and some animals eat other animals. But the Yirudu B'dgas Hayom of Ofer Shamayim means that that the human being is given the role that he should rule over. He should be the master over the fish, the birds, and the animal world, and all the insects. In other words, all living beings are created subject to man's rule. So the emphasis here is man, if you like, as supremely able to dominate the animal world. That's the first description we're getting of Adam. Vayivra Elokim es ha'adam b'tzalmai, b'tzelem Elokim bara oso. HaKadosh Baruch Hu creates the human being, b'tzelem Elokim. We looked at several different perushim on the tzelem Elokim. Just to remind you, of course, there is no tzelem. Tzelem means in the image of God. In what sense are we in the image of God? So, for example, the Ibn Ezra writes, if you remember, we are in the image of God in the sense that we contain within us something nitzchi. There's an element within the human being which is eternal, as opposed to all other animals who die and eventually die and are eliminated from the world. The human being is never eliminated from existence. Even after death, the neshama continues to live lonetzach. So the fact that the human being has something eternal in him or her, that is, says the Ibn Ezra, the Tzelem Elokim. In that sense, we are similar to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who is, of course, Ein Sof, who is infinite and whose existence is infinite. And he has bequeathed to the human being some little spark of infinity. And that is the Tzelem Elokim. Just to remind you, the Meshech Chochma, I think we looked at, emphasizes the idea that Tzelem Elokim means free will, that all other animals function according to instinct, they react to the environment, they react to the world around them, but the human being has the ability to choose not to react, to choose what is right and wrong, and to overcome instincts and to overcome drives and instinctual behavior. All that is Tzelem Elokim. So you can see already from the beginning, we are given this phrase, Tzelem Elokim, as the mafteach. It's the key to understanding the uniqueness of the human being. And here it says, Zochar unekeva bara oso. He created them male and female. And from the very beginning, the male and the female seem to be created together. If I'm pausing every now and again, ladies and gentlemen, it's just because I'm trying to let people in from the waiting room while I'm giving the shir. So don't worry about that. Okay, so that pasuk 3 is Vayivorech Osam Elokim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives them a bracha. V'yomer lahem peru ravu. So the first job they were given was to dominate the animal kingdom. The second job they were given is peru ravu, means to procreate and to create mankind, to live together, Adam and Eve to live together, and to create future generations. Umilu es haaretz, and milu es haaretz, and fill the earth. V'kivshuha. And this is also another very interesting verb. V'kivshuha. What does he translate? Right? He translates it and master it. Right? The kibush. Kibush means to conquer the world. So the human being here is described in his role as dominating the animal kingdom, conquering the world. And again, there's a repetition, Uradu bidgas hayom of Ofer Shamayim, Kochayra Meset Aretz, and to rule over the animal kingdom. Right. And then at the end it says, this is the final closing pasuk of the whole of chapter 1. Vayar Elokim es kol asher osa. Kadosh Baruch Hu saw what he had done. V'hinei tov ma'od, and it's now described as tov ma'od. Tov ma'od. Vayer vayivoka yom hashishi, and that's the end of chapter 1. Incidentally, it's worth noticing that on Friday nights for Kiddush, we start off the Kiddush by saying Yom Hashishi. We don't start with Vayichulu Hashamayim Va'aretz, even though the Gemara tells us that Friday night for Kiddush, before you say the actual Kiddush, which actual Kiddush starts with Bara Pri Hagafen. The Gemara says before you make Kiddush, you should say Vayichulu. Okay, that's we all do that on Friday night. But then the minhag emerged to not to start with the words Vayichulu Hashamayim Va'aretz, but to start with the words Yom Hashishi, even though Yom Hashishi is not the same pasuk, right? It's the last 2 words of the previous pasuk. In fact, it's the last 2 words of the previous chapter, because Vayichulu Hashamayim Va'aretz is already chapter 2 in Bereshis. Chapter 1 ends by Yom Hashishi. Does anybody know? I'm asking a question here. You're allowed to unmute yourself and contribute. Does anybody know why we do this? Why do we start with Yom HaShishi? It's a bit of an unusual practice to start in our tefillos to use a half a pasuk. Usually, when we say a pasuk, we usually say a complete pasuk, and here we're saying Yom HaShishi, which is really half a pasuk. It's a fragment of a pasuk. There are some people who start off Friday night by Erev Vayivoka Yom HaShishi. I asked somebody once why he does that. So he says, really, well, one shouldn't really say half a pasuk. So therefore, he solves it by saying by Erev Vayivoka Yom HaShishi, which is a very nice answer until you open the Chumash and you realize that actually by Erev Vayivoka Yom HaShishi is also half a pasuk. Because the pasuk says, Vayar Elokim es kol asher osa v'hinei tov ma'od by Erev Vayivoka Yom HaShishi. So actually, saying Vayerev Vayivoka doesn't solve the problem at all. If you want to say a full pasuk, you're going to start Vayerev Elokim es kol asher osa v'hinei tov ma'od Vayerev Vayivoka Yom HaShishi. Anyhow, I'll call upon him. Ladies and gentlemen, anybody get any ideas? Why do we start Friday night with Yom HaShishi, which is something else completely? Don't forget, we're talking about bringing in the Shabbos, and Shabbos starts with Vayichulu Hashamayim Va'aretz. Yom HaShishi still relates to the 6th day of creation, which is Friday. So why do we say Yom HaShishi? Any offers?
Yud K Vav K.
Right. Michael, what do you mean? Spell it out. What do you mean Yud K Vav K?
Because it's the initial letters Yud Hey of Yom HaShishi.
Right. Okay, so let's give a bit of background here. This is an important detail which we'll come back to later on. And in the whole of chapter 1, God is only referred to as Elokim, not with the Yud K Vav K name, right? However, the first time Yud Kei Vav Kei appears, it appears in an acrostic. It's the Roshei Tevas, Yom Hashishi Vayichulu Hashamayim. Yom Hashishi Vayichulu Hashamayim. That is 4 words, where the first letter of each word is Yom is the Yud, Hashishi is the Hey, Vayichulu is the Vav, Hashamayim is the Hey. Vayichulu Hashamayim V'oretz. So Yom Hashishi Vayichulu Hashamayim, we are actually saying that we are introducing, if you like, another aspect of the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu into this world, that while HaKadosh Baruch Hu was creating simply the cosmos, he was functioning as Elokim. When Shabbos came in, that was the beginning of Yud Kei Vav Kei. Yud Kei Vav Kei is a more purely spiritual, infinite, and more personal God than Elokim. Elokim is the God of nature. Elokim is the forces, the powers in this world, the God who brought the cosmos into existence. Yud Kei Vav Kei is the God to whom we daven, the God with whom we have a relationship, the Hashgacha, the HaKadosh Baruch Hu on us. That is Yud Kei Vav Kei. That's Hashem. That's a different story completely. And that started with Shabbos. So when Shabbos comes in, we are ushering in the a different, if you like, a different presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu into this world. In that context, just incidentally, some of you might be familiar with the first Mishnah in Maseches Shabbos. If you're not familiar, after the Shia, you can look it up. The first Mishnah in Maseches Shabbos deals with carrying. And it speaks about carrying from the house into the street, from the street into the house. And it starts off with the words, Yetzias HaShabbos, Shtayim Shehein Arba Bifnim, Shtayim Shehein Arba Bachutz. In other words, there are different aspects of carrying. They are Shtayim, which means carrying from the Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah, or from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah, Shehein Arba, which they could be divided up into 4 different types of categories, as the Mishnah spells out. But what's interesting is that some of the more mystical Mefarshim point out that the language of the Mishnah, while the Mishnah is meant to be a purely halachic text, actually has certain mystical interpretation to it, that the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the Arba. The name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu are the 4 letters, the Yud Kei Vav Kei, right? The 4 letters of the Shem Hashem, and they are Shtayim Bifnim and Shtayim Bachutz, which means they are the first 2 letters, the Yud and the Hey, are Bachutz. They're outside of Shabbos. That's still Yom HaShishi. They're still in Friday. And Shtayim Bifnim is the Vav Hey, is inside of Shabbos, is the Shtayim Bifnim. So Yetzias HaShabbos, Shtayim Shehein Arba, right? Or Arba Shem Shtayim Bachutz. In other words, the language of the Mishnah, which is speaking about halacha, also refers to the way in which the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the ineffable name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is coded into the text with 2 letters Bachutz and 2 letters Bifnim, right? Right? This is a very interesting aspect of the. I could spend the rest of the shir on this subject, which I'm not going to. Maybe I'll just add one other thing which you might be interested in, is that, of course, the author of L'chot Dodi, anybody know who it was? Who wrote L'chot Dodi? Any offers? Yes, Dina. Who wrote L'chot Dodi? You're muted, I'm afraid. Shlomo Alkabetz. And Shlomo Alkabetz, and he lived when?
In Tzfat with the Ari.
That's right. He was a colleague of the Arizal in Tzfat. So he was one of the great Mekubolim 500 years ago, from Shlomo Alkabetz. And he wrote the L'chot Dodi. And frankly, what he achieved was something really totally remarkable, is that because he wrote L'chot Dodi, he sort of, if you like, inaugurated a whole new tefillah, which the Jewish people had never heard of before. You know, what Klal Yisrael had been davening for a few thousand years already. But suddenly, 500 years ago, a group of people in Tzfat invented a new tefillah. And that new tefillah was what? Was Kabbalas Shabbos. If you look in the Shulchan Aruch, you will find that Ma'ariv on Friday night begins with Baruch Hu, like Ma'ariv on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Ma'ariv always starts every night of the week with Baruch Hu. And on Friday night, it also begins with Baruch Hu. And before the 1500s, it also, Ma'ariv began with Baruch Hu. But the Mekubalim in Tzfat insisted on davening a Kabbalah Shabbos, and Reb Shlomo Alkabetz wrote this amazing tefillah of L'chododi Likras Kala Pnei Shabbos Nekabla, and that tefillah automatically was accepted like wildfire around the entire world. Sfaradim, Ashkenazim, in Israel, in Europe, in North Africa, everywhere where Jews lived, they picked up this tefillah, which is an amazing thing. I don't know anybody else actually who was zeicher to write an original piece of text, which was immediately adopted worldwide by the entire Klal Yisrael. I mean, it's historically, it was a one and only event, right? But this L'chododi, I just want to point out one thing. There's lots of interesting things about this chapter. We were talking about the Yud Kei Vav Kei, right? The name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the two letters outside and two letters inside, if you like, of Shabbos. So if you have a look at this phrase, this is homework for you, ladies and gentlemen, before next Friday night, look up L'chododi. So L'chododi Likras Kala, the phrase is L'chododi Likras Kala, right? That's the first half of the pasuk. And Pnei Shabbos Nekabla is the second part of it, right? So you will find that L'chododi Likras Kala has got 15 letters, like the Yud and the Hey. And the Pnei Shabbos Nekabla, right, has got 11 letters, like the Vov and the Hey. Are you following what's going on here? So the Mekubalim were very, very particular to structure all their texts along the lines of the mathematical structure of the Shem Hashem. So in this phrase, L'chododi Likras Kala Pnei Shabbos Nekabla is coded in the Shem Yud Kei Vav Kei. There are 26 letters in it. But what's more interesting is that as L'chododi Likras Kala, the Likras Kala is still Friday. We're going towards the Kala. And that's the Yom HaShishi, that's the Yud and the Hey. And Pnei Shabbos Nekabla, that is the Vav and the Hey, that's the 11, the second part of it. So the whole pasuk is structured around this idea. Are you following me? That when Shabbos comes in, that's the moment that we are greeting the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in a different format, right? The different format of the way in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu appears in this world. Sometimes Elokim, sometimes Yud Kei Vav Kei, but it comes with Shabbos, and L'chododi Likras Kala has got lots of very interesting coded messages within it. And that's all I'm going to say about that for the time being. Is anybody in the waiting room? Let me have a look. No, nobody's in the waiting room. Waiting room, everybody from the waiting room is here. As far as I can see, my computer doesn't show anybody waiting to get in. Has anybody got any information that someone's waiting to get in? No. Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
There is. My sister was trying to get in, Sherry Rife, and she was unable to get in. I'll phone her and tell her to try again.
Tell her to try again.
Okay,
It didn't come up on my. Everybody else has come up on my screen.
Helen French as well was trying to get in.
Anyway, I'm looking at my list of participants, and it always tells me if anyone is trying to get in. And at the moment, there is no one who is waiting, who is knocking on the door, unable to get in, as far as I can see. If anybody has texted you, please ask them to keep trying. And I will obviously let them in as soon as their name pops up on the screen. Okay, let's go back. Let's go back to the shared screen. Okay. So we looked at Rashi, we looked at the Ibn Ezra.
Right, I told him, he said there was nobody in the waiting room.
Are they using the right Zoom ID? Because today's shir is on a different Zoom ID to usual. You're right? The Zoom ID of today is my Zoom, not the Zoom of Beit Knesset HaNasi. She has to use the Zoom link, which is unique to this shir, because Eli Friedwald's away. So the number of the Zoom today is my private number. I pay for it. So it's not the Beit Knesset HaNasi one. Okay. We're now going to move, ladies and gentlemen, to Bereshis chapter 2, and we're going to have a look at the way in which man and woman are created here in chapter 2. Okay? So first of all, here's the pasuk. Everybody with me? Vayitzer Hashem Elokim es ha'adam ofar min ha'adama. HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the human being out of the dust of the earth. So immediately I'm going to ask you a question. How is that different to the description? How is that different to the description in the chapter 1? I'm going to tell you, in chapter 1, there is no reference at all to man being created from the dust of the earth. In chapter 1, it just says, let me remind you, chapter 1, it says, Nasa Odom B'Tzalmeinu. Let's make man in our image, right? And then it says here, Vayivro Elokim es ha'adam, he created man, B'Tzelem Elokim. It doesn't say anything in chapter 1 about the dust of the earth, that man was created from the dust of the earth. But here in chapter 2, suddenly it says, Vayitza Hashem Elokim es ha'adam, ofar min ha'adam. Now the human being, in essence, is created out of the raw materials of the earth, right? Also, incidentally, right, we find here a different word. What does this mean by Vayitzer? Right? In chapter 1, it says Vayivro. HaKadosh Baruch Hu created. Yes, Dina, you want to say something?
Yes, first of all, this is a much more in-depth description. It's like chapter 1 was more of an introduction, and it's very detailed now. The other thing is by Yivras creates something out of nothing, and the Yitzar is to make something from something existing.
Right. So let's just pause on that for a second. Dina's absolutely right. By Yivra means that the man was created yesh me'ayin. Beresh is boro elokim. So we understood that boro means to create ex nihilo, out of nothing. And here he's not created out of nothing. He's created out of ofar min ha'adama. Right? And I agree with what Dina's saying in principle, but I think that's really, in a sense, a bit of a simplistic answer. In general, the simple pshat, it's always good to mention the simple pshat. The simple pshat is that in chapter 1, it gives you just a general reference to the creation of man and woman. And then in chapter 2, it spells it out more in detail. It spells it out how it works. But actually, there's something much deeper going on here, as we'll see as we go along. So even in this opening word, in this opening phrase, there are 3 important differences here. The first one is ofar min ha'adama, that is created out of earth. Second one is it uses the word vayitzer instead of vayivra. And the third one is it speaks about Hashem Elokim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is already described differently. Because in chapter 1, it's only vayivra Elokim. Right? It's all just the forces of creation, the forces of nature. And here it's Hashem Elokim. It uses the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu explicitly. Having created the human being out of the dust of the earth, it then says, Vayipach ba'apov nishmas chayim. Vayhi ha'adam lenefesh chayim. Right? So the Vayipach ba'apov nishmas chayim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu breathed into the human being a nishmas chayim. And this is in fact why we use the word neshama to mean the soul of the human being, because it's described here in Bereshit chapter 2, the arrival of the unique soul of the human being comes through the neshima. Neshima literally means the breath. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu breathed into the human being. This is of course a metaphor. He breathed into him nishmas chayim, a breath of life, a breath of life. And the human being became a living being, but he became a unique living being who had both Ofer min ha'adama, the dust of the earth, and the neshama. What else is different between this and the first pasuk? Have a look at this pasuk here. What other detail is there in this pasuk, which is this chapter 1? I've now highlighted chapter 1, which is different to chapter 2. Anybody got any offers? Yes.
Here it says a carbon and came out. Here it doesn't. He created them.
Say it again.
Here it says Zachar v'Nekeva, he created
Right.
them, and there in that passage it doesn't say that.
Chapter 1, it says that they were created from the very beginning, Zachar u'Nekeva. In the very beginning, it says they were created man and woman. Neither man nor woman was created first. Neither man nor woman were created from each other. Neither man nor woman really had any seniority over each other. They were created completely equal in chapter 1. Zachar u'Nekeva bara otam. The plural. They were created male and female. Whereas in chapter 2, man is created alone. Man is created alone. That's it, just the man. And as you know, I haven't brought you all the text here. As you know, later on, the pasuk says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu looks at the man and he says the famous pasuk, Lo toiv heyos adam levado. It's not good for him to be alone. I'm going to create for him an ezer kenegdo. We're going to look at that maybe in the next year a bit more clearly. But what's interesting is in chapter 2, the woman is created later on to assist the man. But in chapter 1, that's not the case. In chapter 1, they're absolutely equal to each other. No one's assisting anybody, right? In chapter 1, they're completely the same, created in the same way with Tselem Elokim. So this is already so we've got several differences here. First of all, by Yitzer instead of by Yivra. Secondly, Hashem Elokim. Thirdly, Ofer Minu Adama. And fourthly, he's created alone. Created alone. Right? This already gives a trigger to the title of Rav Soloveitchik's famous piece, which he calls The Lonely Man of Faith. Right? We'll come to that in a minute. But in a sense, just to give you a bit of a preview, of Soloveitchik's understanding, I'll just speak about it for a couple of minutes. Of Soloveitchik's understanding that I'd like to look at together with you is that the reason why the Torah gives us a dual account of the creation of man and woman is to tell us that the human being has a dual nature. And actually, it's telling us something very profound about the dual nature of a human being. That we are all of us at the same time. We are the human being of chapter 1, and we are also the human being of chapter 2. And we, at different stages in our life, choose to be either the one or the other. And he's going to describe for us in great detail, very beautifully, what these two, if you like, character types are. But the human being, him or herself, he is divided up into these two different categories, as we're going to see later, as we're going to see in his writings. I brought you a few paragraphs from his writings in a minute, but it's not because there's any contradiction between the two. And it's also, according to Soloveitchik, it's not because one of them is an introduction and the other one is just a detailed explanation. These are two different people, right? But within human nature, there is this duality. There is a dual, if you like, two different wavelengths that the human being can function on, can function as what he called Adam 1 and Adam 2. That's how he refers to them. Adam 1 is described in chapter 1 and Adam 2 is in chapter 2. And we can, all of us at different times of our life, be either one or the other. Let's have a look at this. Let's also have a look here by Yita. And here with Adam 2, also it says here something else. By Yita Hashem Elokim Gan Ba'eden Mikeden. Suddenly we hear about Gan Eden. Right? In chapter 1, there was no reference to Gan Eden. The human being wasn't created in Gan Eden in chapter 1. In chapter 1, it just says he's got to dominate the animal world, dominate nature, and master the world. Here, he's not mastering any world. Here, he is living in Gan Eden. Right? We don't know really what Gan Eden is. The Garden of Eden. We don't know what it is. And there's a lot of very beautiful material to try and explain what it means. I think we can assume, for the purposes of this shir, on a simple pshat, Gan Eden was a location, was a physical location on the earth. In actual fact, Gan Eden is more likely to be not a description of a particular location and geography, but Gan Eden is a certain state of being. It was created in an idyllic state. Gan Ba'eden Mikedem. What's Mikedem mean? Any offers on the word Mikedem? So the word Kedem, he translated here in the East.
From before, the original.
Right, okay. So the word Kedem has got a very interesting ambiguity to it in the Hebrew language, right? Kedem can mean the East, right? But Kedem can also mean Chadesh Yomeinu Kekedem. Chadesh Yomeinu Kekedem has got nothing to do with the East and the West. Chadesh Yomeinu Kekedem means renew our lives like they were originally, right? That we look back to some original state of harmony and spirituality, which we're trying to recapture later on. So Kedem here could mean from before. And of course, if it does mean from before, it means from before the Chet. Don't forget, the whole story of Adam and Chava revolves around the Chet of the Eitz Hadas, of eating from the tree of knowledge. We'll have a look at that, please God, next week's share a bit more in closer in detail. But the Kedem is beforehand. It's interesting that actually under the chuppah, right? We've all been, haven't we, under the chuppah, and we've heard the bracha. Where does it say Mikedem under the chuppah? Any offers? Sameach tesamach, reim ho'ahuvim, kesameichacha yitzircha began Eden Mikedem. Right? So we're giving a bracha to Chos and Akala that they should have a taste of life in Gan Eden Mikedem, from its original state of harmony, of ruchnius, of pure love, without any friction, without the nochosh, without any of the disasters, without any of the mistakes, right? So it's Gan Eden Mikedem, the Gan Eden as it used to be originally. So Adam number 2, in chapter 2, is created in an idyllic state of Gan Ba'eden Mikedem. Right? And then we're told something else. here, v'yatzmach Hashem Elokim b'nu Adam kol eitz nechbud l'mareh v'tov l'machal. In this Gan, there was the most beautiful and tasteful food growing on trees. And so that's the first thing. And the fruit of the trees was what Adam and Chava ate from. Right? We're not actually told anything about wheat and barley or bread or anything like that at all. They lived completely, and according to Chazal, they were still vegetarians, and they lived completely off fruit of the trees. Right? And then there is, now we're given an introduction, we'll see more about that later on, the Eitz HaChayim b'toch hagan, the Eitz HaDas tov v'ra. So there are these two trees which are unique. What do they represent? What do they resemble? We're not going to look at that today. We'll come back to that, please God, on a later share. But what's interesting here is that you have, so we think that Gan Eden is a composite word, meaning one particular, let's say one particular place. Now we're told something different, this pasuk. Look at this pasuk here. The Nahar is a river, Yotzei me Eden. In other words, the place was actually called Eden, and from Eden there flowed a river, Lahashkos Agan, to water the garden. So in fact, Gan and Eden are two separate things. There is Eden, which is, if you like, the larger location. The Gan is a separate location, and the Eden and the Gan are joined by a river. That is the pasuk, right? Question is what to make of this pasuk. What are we dealing with here? The Nahar, the Eden, and the Gan. And this becomes a very, very fascinating subject in the Midrashim, in the Meforshim, in the Zohar, really fascinating subjects. What is this river? What is this river bringing us from Eden into the Gan? And in fact, it appears in Tehillim. I think I mentioned to you, I think I brought it here in the text. Let me just see for a second. All right, have a look here. In Tehillim chapter 36. Some people, like myself, have a minhag when you put on the talis in the morning. If you have a look at your siddur, when it says atifas atalas, putting on the talis before Shachris in the morning, before you make the bracha, or really after you make the bracha, Sheikh Nishon Elis Atef Batzitzis, that the siddur will tell you the minhag is to say 4 psukim from Tehillim chapter 36. And the psukim are, Mayoko chastecha Elokim, uvnei odom b'tzel kanafecha yechasoyun. How precious is your kindness, O God, mankind shelters in your wings, right? And that's meant to be a little bit of a reference to the talis, if you like we are under the talis, so we live under the kanfei hashchina, right? B'tzel kanafecha yechasoyun, we take shelter in the shadow of your wings. And then the pasuk in Tehillim says, Yirviyun mideshen beisecha, right? They feast, he translated, they feast on the richness of your house, deshen beisecha. And now look at the phrase here used in Tehillim, the nachal adonecho tashkei. So here the David HaMelech in Tehillim draws on Bereshis chapter 2, in trying to find the right words to ask for the Birkas Hashem. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu showers upon us his blessings, what we're really asking for is the Nachal from Eden, right? Nachal is the river. Which river? The Nachal Adonecha, right? From Eden. You can see here the word Eden. Adonecha means your Eden. He doesn't translate it like that. You let them drink in your refreshing stream, but actually Adonecha means the river from Eden. Tashkeim, you should let them from the word hashkos, which means to let them drink from it. So here David HaMelech is using our pasuk, right, to describe the special brachas that we get from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that's the river that comes from Eden. So very briefly, this pasuk, where is this pasuk? Here it is. This pasuk really is a very, very beautiful image of a place called Eden, which is a place of pure spiritual harmony. And from there flows a river. And that river carries with it the spiritual blessings into the Gan. And the Gan is this world. The Gan is our world in which the fruit trees are growing. In other words, the world of our physical existence is the Gan. And I want to just tell you from the Mekubalim speak about the idea of Oneg Shabbos, right? What is Oneg Shabbos? So Oneg is written in Hebrew, Ayin Nun Gimel, right? Oneg Shabbos is Ayin Nun Gimel. Say the Mekubalim that Ayin Nun Gimel of Oneg represents the word Ayin is the Eden, the Nun is the Nahar, is the river, and the Gimel is the Gan. In other words, the Oneg is a flow from Gan Eden, from the Eden through the river into the Gan. That we're looking on Shabbos to have Oneg Shabbos, which means to benefit from HaKadosh Baruch Hu's blessing of spiritual harmony and uplifting spiritual ideas and experiences. And that's all Oneg Shabbos, because the Eden represents, if you like, the source of all ruchnius. The Nahar represents our ability to extract something from the ruchnius and apply it into the Gan, which is the physical world. So this Nahar, Eden, Gan triple appearance here is actually a very, very interesting mechanism, which is telling us something about human life. That throughout our lives we live in the Gan. We live in that part of the world where we can find our sustenance, or we can exist. But what we're looking for is to find a river which will bring with it some inspiration and harmony from Eden. So that's the Naho Yotze Me Eden Lahashkos Zagan. Why is it 4 different Mishom Yipored La'arba Roshim? Why does it divide up into 4 different branches? If I have time next week, I'll have a closer look at what the 4 branches of the river are. But what's important is simply to see the connection between these 3 things. And all this only happens with Adam 2. Adam 2 is, in chapter 2, he is made from the dust of the earth, right? He's put in Gan Eden, but he's drawing down from Eden, he's drawing down the Ruchnius into this world, and he's been, HaKadosh Baruch Hu has, so to speak, breathed into him a neshama. But what's interesting is that this word here, the first word used for Adam Harishon in chapter 2 is Vayitzer. Now, in actual fact, so Vayitzer, it could have been written by Yotzar. In Hebrew, the words to create is Yitzira, right? So it could say by Yotzar Hashem Elokim as Adam. God created man. Instead, it says Vayitzer. Can you see the highlighted word on the screen? Vayitzer is written in Hebrew with a double yud. Can you see that? Unnecessarily a double yud. So this double yud is the source of some very interesting material in the Gemara, and I brought you one Gemara here, which is in Brachas Daf Samach Aleph, famous Gemara Samach Aleph. So the Gemara says, Dorash Rav Nachman bar Rav Chizda. Everybody with me on the screen? I haven't translated this. My dichtiv. So the Gemara there says, what does it mean in the pasuk when it says, Vayitza Hashem Elokim Adam B'shnei Yudim? Why is it written with 2 yuds? Okay, so bear in mind, the first time the human being is created, just as by Yivra, he was created Yesh Me'ayin. Suddenly here we have a different type of human being. And this human being is, from the very beginning, described as Vayitze with two yuds. Says the Gemara, Shnei Yitzorim bara HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu created within the human being two Yitzarim. And what are they? Echad Yetzer Tov, Echad Yetzer Ra. Right, so we're all familiar, I think, with this terminology, the Yetzer HaTov and the Yetzer Hara. But it's interesting to pay attention just from the very beginning that the word Yetzer means a drive to create, a drive to be effective in this world, right? A Yetzira, right? Only there are things that we create which are good, and there are things which we can create which are bad. So by Yitzer already relates more directly to the fact that a human being has within him, or her, has within him these two different, one would say, two different voices, right? Within the human being, there are two different voices. There is the Yetzer HaTov and the Yetzer Hara from the very beginning. And that the human being is created in such a way, and really he needs a lot of seichel to identify within oneself what is the voice of the Yetzer HaTov and what is the voice of the Yetzer Hara. And this is very much, takes us very deep into a whole analysis of human nature. This goes back to the very beginning where I said to you about Sefer Bereshis. Sefer Bereshis is interested in telling us what is the real essential nature of mankind. The essential nature of mankind is being described here, the Yetzer HaTov and the Yetzer Hara. This is a, sometimes in English, they use very sort of brief little seemingly profound statements, from Shakespeare, for example, be true to yourself, to thine own self, be true. I'm sure everyone's heard that. You can Google it, to thine own self, be true to yourself, be authentic, be true to yourself, and that's the key to authenticity and happiness. That, from a Torah point of view, that statement is rubbish. And I'll tell you why it's rubbish. Because the problem isn't whether you're true to yourself or not. The problem is which self do you want to be true to? Do you want to be true to your Yetzer HaTov self or to Yetzer Hara self? Every human being has got two different selves, right? You can be, I'll tell you something, I've been told that one of the most worldwide popular websites promoting gay and lesbian life is called tothineownselfbetrue.com, right? Be true to yourself, that's yourself, right? And be true to yourself, and that is the to thine own self be true. The question is, which self? So from the very beginning, telling someone to be true to yourself, be yourself, is a very unhelpful thing to say. Because the question is, which self? Well, the Baal HaTanya, when he discusses this, the Baal HaTanya calls the Rotzain Elyon and the Rotzain Tachtoin. Every human being has two different systems of ratzon, of will, of desire, of aspiration. He has a higher and a lower aspiration. His higher aspiration is the Rotzon Elyon, to do what makes you, somebody just wrote in, to do what makes you happy, do what makes you satisfied, do what makes you feel good. That's fantastic, right? But the question is that the Rotzon Elyon and you're happy because you're doing something meaningful and purposeful and something which fulfills your life and gives your life meaning? Maybe that's why you're happy. Or maybe you're doing something which simply makes you happy because you are fulfilling some more materialistic and egoistic selfishness of your own. Maybe that's what makes you happy. So in other words, it doesn't help to say to somebody, be true to yourself. Because we were created by Yitzer Hashem Elokim with a double yud. We have a double self. There is the self that wants to do good, and the self which is actually completely egoistic, completely self-serving, and ultimately destructive. The force for good and the force for destruction, right? And many people can't tell the difference. Many people can't tell the difference between the two. And that's why, for example, we haven't got a government at the moment. That's one of the reasons we haven't got a government, because there are some people who hate each other so much, right, that they hate each other more than they hate the people who want to kill them. But they're willing to sit down with the people who want to kill them rather than sit down with people that they hate, because their egos and their hatreds are so involved in their decision making, they've lost the plot completely. I'm not a political commentator, and it's not my intention to analyze political situations. It's just heartbreaking to see what's going on at the moment. The egos and the hatreds and the hostilities between people who should be friends, who should be colleagues, and they're willing more to sit down with people who are dedicated to destroy the Jewish state. They're willing to sit down with them rather than sit down with each other. Hashem Yirachem Aleinu. Anyhow, coming back to our pasuk, Vayitze Hashem Elokim. Hashem created a human being with a double identity. A double self-identity is the two yuds, right? The Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Hara. And that's how he's created from the very beginning. So we're coming to the end of the shir. I haven't even started yet to learn with you the text from Soloveitchik. I've brought you up several paragraphs, but I've set the stage now so that next week we can have a closer look at Soloveitchik. For those of you who've got the book, or those of you who are willing to go out and get the book is The Lonely Man of Faith, written in the 1960s. A beautiful, beautiful poetic and inspirational analysis of the difference between the way Adam and Chava are created in chapter 1 and chapter 2 and what it means for us today. Next week, we're going to look at this a bit more carefully, but here we have two different descriptions of mankind, not because there are two options here, not because these are two different texts describing different aspects, or one is a general or one is particular, but because the human being is a dual person, is a dual being and operates on different levels. And chapter 1 describes one level and chapter 2 describes a different level. And the question is how to balance between the Adam and Chava of chapter 1 as opposed to the Adam and Chava of chapter 2. How to balance these two things together. And ultimately, the goal is to bring down from Eden through the Nahar into the Gan. That is the route that we're going to be looking at a bit more carefully. HaKadosh Baruch Hu created something called Eden, which is the source of all ruchnius, spirituality, morality, harmony, and beauty in this world. And there are rivers bringing it down into this world, into the Gan, into the garden where the fruit is growing, where we can pluck that fruit and use that to live from. And please God, more about that next week. Okay, I'm going to try and find some way to, I'm going to stop the recording now.